It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
Bo, this one hit me because when we were at lunch today, you said we got to get 88 times over in there.
We have to. We can't talk about rate of return without mentioning this unbelievable concept of 88 times over.
We love compounding interest because, you know, the reason we use talk about the concept of 88 times over is if you take a 20-year-old, one of the things that got me even into this as a profession was I had the high school teacher that told me if I could save $100 a month, I could be a millionaire by the time I retired. And that kind of woke up something that was sleeping inside of me.
Because you recognized how attainable it was.
Because I don't come from money, you don't come from money. And just hearing that $100 a month could make me wealthy, I was like, I could do that. So it made it much more attainable. So that put us on the mission of this 88 times over. And where that number comes from is that if a 20-year-old invests in something as simple as the S&P 500, $1 invested in the S&P 500 making approximately 10% per year, all the way up until they reach 65. That day that they reach 65, that $1 turns into $88.
It's unbelievable.
That is magical. So here's what I want to talk about is what if I think the biggest risk that a young person has is what if you're a person who's 25 years old and you fund your Roth IRA? You can put $6,000 in there in 2019.
That's right.
What if we could apply that same logic to 88 times over of what could it turn into? What's its potential? But the thing I worry about for 25-year-olds is what if you don't understand rate of return and you're not swinging for the fences at such a young age? I mean, when you have 30, 40 years from retirement, you should be aggressive. No doubt, but there's a lot of people, because you don't have knowledge, because you don't have the skill to know what you're investing in, I think oftentimes there are younger people that actually don't take risks.
That's right.
They pull it down because they just don't understand. And
Or maybe they had a model from their parents that they didn't know about investing or know how to go out there and take risks. Maybe their thought of investing is CDs or something like that.
So hopefully this will be your wake-up call on the power of rate of return is think about a 25-year-old that can make 10% a year for 40 years because you got 40 years until you reach 65. Right. That's 480 months. It could potentially turn into $322,000.
So I want to say that a little bit differently. If you're someone out there who's 25 years old and you're listening, every Roth IRA contribution that you make right now, if you max out your Roth, could be over $300,000 when you're 65.
If you invest in something like the S&P 500. But think about this. What if you were that scared investor at 25, didn't know any better, and you went something much more conservative? And instead of making 10%, you made 6% on your investment. Because remember, the whole purpose of the show today is to talk about the power of your rate of return and how it's all impacted. Right. So if you invested and it was only 6%, so you trimmed 4% off of your rate of return, do you know what that money would be worth with the same amount of time invested, 40 years?
Well, okay, so let's see. $322,000 is if you made 10%, and 6% is a little more than half of 10%. So you figure half of $322,000
is 60%. So if you did 60%, no,
$160,000, $170,000.
If you 322 times 60%, you can quickly see that should be well over 180, getting close to $190,000. No, your rate of return at 6% would be $65,745.
$65,000. So it dropped from 300. No change in behavior, no change in activity, no change in what they're doing. The only thing we altered was the rate of return that was achieved.
The difference of $256,000 is all driven by rate of return. So this is why we want to talk about the power of your rate of return is get it right, know where you are in your age group so you can take the chances. Now I want to flip the script on you because a lot of people out there, you just heard me say, well, I need to be swinging for the fences. I need to be taking more risk. Let's fast forward and look at a 50-year-old, 60-year-old, somebody who's 5 to 7 years from retirement. So somebody who's 5 to 7 years from retirement, what happens with their rate of return if they're doing it wrong? Because I want you, when you're 30 or 25, why would you want to have the portfolio of somebody who's retiring 5 to 7 years when you've got 30 to 40 years to retire? When you're 50 to 60 years old, why would you want the portfolio of a 25-year-old when you only have 5 to 7 years to retire? You see how they're the exact same sentences. I just flipped the script based upon how much time you have, and that impacts the rate of return. So hopefully by the time you're in your 50s to 60s, we're at 7 figures. So I took an example of somebody who had $1 million If you had $1 million, and I think in my show notes I said 50 originally, it's actually a 60-year-old. A 60-year-old with a market loss of 12%.
Okay.
So think about it, because markets do go down from time to time, and you've got to think about these things when you're investing, and because that's rate of return. Yeah. We don't always make money when we're trying to grow assets. So $1 million invested, you lose 12%, you still have $880,000. You lost $120,000. So you can make that back pretty quickly, probably. What if you were a 60-year-old that didn't understand your rate of return and what was needed, so you invested in the S&P 500?
Okay.
We know how good it is. The S&P 500 makes around 10% per year annualized. Let's go for it. That's what we're thinking. But at 60, the S&P 500, if you took a year like 2008, lost 37%. 37% loss is a loss of $370,000 on $1 million.
So now your $1 million is only worth $630,000.
Exactly. So the difference between those two numbers, the 880, if you did it, because look, you notice I didn't say you weren't losing money.
Right.
Anybody who is invested in a diversified portfolio, when you have a year like 2008 where the market gets its teeth kicked in, even if you have a somewhat conservative portfolio, you still could lose some money. But it was much more, it was mitigated substantially. Instead of losing 37% like the broad market did, you could potentially lose like 12 to 15%. Sure. So the difference between these two is $250,000. Only difference was rate of return and the structure of the portfolio.
So I think what you're saying is rate of return matters both on the positive side as well as on the negative side, and it matters both in the accumulation stage as well as the decumulation stage. And we're going to dive into that a little more as we go through
this. That's exactly. You need to understand the power of your rate of return.